While China struggled with its ancient traditions, Japan was dancing to a modern beat. In the cities, it was a time of bobbed hair and bathing beauties, of chorus lines and cabarets. Young people were consumed with being mobo and moga, modern boy and modern girl. People flocked to baseball games and newer entertainments like radio and Hollywood movies. Of course, modernization meant new problems, like rush hour. Or the mysteries of dining, Western style. But for many Japanese, the problem was modernization itself. Modernization had widened gaps between city and country. Farmers were at the mercy of international markets. If rice or silk prices fell in the West, farmers starved. For food, many families sold their daughters into prostitution. Many sons looked to military service as the only escape from a life of poverty and ignorance. In the factories, striking workers were demanding a bigger share of the profits. The big family-run corporations called zaibatsu used their power to keep wages low and profits high. Zaibatsu greed pushed many young Japanese far to the political left. But while the left looked forward to a workers' paradise, Japan's radical right wing looked back toward Japan's past. They saw national salvation in a return to the way of the samurai, a country ruled by the emperor and run by pure-hearted officials. They believed that Japan, in its headlong rush to imitate the West, was selling its national soul. In the early 1920s, most Japanese were caught between modern times and old traditions, embracing Western ideas while fearing the power of the West. Out of these conflicts emerged a radical young philosopher named Kita Ikki. He began his life searching for a way to close the gap between Japan's rich and poor, and to inspire Asia to fight against foreign influences and Western imperialism.
Kita Ikki reacted strongly against the westernization of Japan as he saw it. For him, the West was the enemy. Japan had to fight the battle of Asia against the West. That meant he was for a pan-Asian movement, in which, of course, the Japanese would always be top dog. So he went to China, as other Japanese of that day did. Kita went there right after Sun Yat-sen's rebellion in 1911.
Kita hoped to help the Chinese free themselves from Western domination. But he soon discovered that the Chinese didn't think of the Japanese as liberators. They saw Japan as just another imperialist, using military power to take commercial advantage of China.
Under my veranda were raging waves of crowds, insanely shouting their anger and hatred at my native land of Japan.
Kita returned home to try to save his country's soul. He retreated to Sado, a remote island in the Sea of Japan. On Sado, Kita found an ancient vision of Japan that shaped his own. In the 13th century, the Buddhist monk Nichiren blasted Japan's spiritual decadence and warned of imminent foreign invasion. The imperial government banished Nichiren to Sado Island, where his disciples still chant the Lotus Sutra. As a young man, Kita became a follower of Nichiren, in whose words Kita found a pure spirit of nationalism.
I will be the pillar of Japan. I will be the eyes of Japan. I will be the vessel of Japan.
Some would say he was a fanatic. He just plowed straight ahead like a medieval Buddhist. And since he was on cocaine, to some degree or another, most of the time, it probably colored the last 30 years of his life more than we know.
Kita took cocaine daily to ease the pain of a childhood eye injury. By the 1920s, he was attending seances, seeing ghosts, and entertaining visions of revolution. In 1920, he published his most famous book, A Plan for the Reconstruction of Japan. Much of it read like a leftist tract. It gave land to the farmers, profits to the workers, and broke the power of the zaibatsu. But its inspiration came from a 19th century Japanese slogan, "Rich nation, strong military." Kita called for a military coup d'etat to re-establish the rule of the emperor. Then the army would drive out the European powers in the name of another slogan, Asia for the Asians.
After destroying England and freeing China, the rising sun flag of Japan will light the darkness of the entire world. Peace without war is not the way to heaven.
In the early 20s, Kita's book only reached a few people. But his radical ideas burned like a slow fuse in a country about to explode. On September 1st, 1923, Japan's main island of Honshu was struck by a devastating earthquake. In Tokyo, the quake started fires that destroyed 700,000 homes. 100,000 people died. The terrible damage shook urban society. In the chaos that followed, wild rumors spread that Koreans and Chinese had set the fires, and that socialists and communists were using the disorder to start riots. Communism preached that workers of the world must unite. But Kita thought that the problems of Japan's poor and homeless could only be solved by a Japanese solution. Nationalism, not international communism. In the late 1920s, Japan's government began to turn to the right, using a peace preservation law to crack down on the dangerous thought of socialists and communists, and to protect private property. In 1929, stock markets crashed all over the world. Huge fortunes were wiped out in a single day. A worldwide depression began. To the Japanese right, the Great Depression was proof that international capitalism was just as dangerous as international communism. To leave Japan's economy to the greed of individuals was a mistake. Kita Ikki believed that the Japanese people were kept poor by wealthy businessmen and politicians who stood between the people and the emperor. To destroy Japan's elites was the mission of military men, whom Kita saw as classless servants of the nation.
The Japanese soldier, the samurai in the late feudal period, was a pure warrior who worked on behalf of the whole country. Translated to the modern scene, that meant that the properly trained warrior would continue to work for the whole country, not for himself.
Inspired by Kita Ikki, Japanese nationalists sought to mobilize the country by invoking ancient cultural myths of the emperor and the sword. Japan thought it needed what had made the Western powers strong, an empire. Dependent on resources and trade from China, Japan moved to annex the Chinese territory of Manchuria. government gave Japanese farmers fertile Manchurian fields and full military protection. But the annexation of Manchuria did not solve Japan's problems. It deepened them. The exploitation of Chinese workers inflamed anti-Japanese feeling. The government and the big zaibatsu companies poured money into Manchuria but got very little out. When conditions did not improve in Japan, many people blamed the greed of wealthy business leaders. Poor young military officers, many of whom came from the countryside, began to talk about radical solutions to Japan's problems. For inspiration, they turned to the words of Kita Ikki.
The people are the main force, and the emperor their commander. Remove the barriers which have separated the people from the emperor.
Kita Ikki was a weird Japanese original. He was a populist, he was a socialist, he was also a fascist, he was an emperor worshiper, he was an anti-capitalist, but he was also anti-communist. And he thought that the hope for Japan lay in some kind of mysterious Japanese nationalization, the product of young people who were loyal to the emperor and who were against all these politicians who picked this idea up. Well, of course, it was the neo-fascist young officers of the 1930s.
At dawn on February 26, 1936, under cover of a snowstorm, 1,400 soldiers assembled to mount an assault on their own government. Rebel soldiers and tanks occupied the center of Tokyo and assassinated key government leaders. Following Kita's blueprint for revolution, they called on the rest of the military to take charge of the country in the name of the emperor. Soon after the attack, loyalist troops surrounded the rebels. The government declared martial law. For 4 days, Tokyo was under siege. During the attack, the rebels had telephoned Kita Ikki to tell him his vision of pure-hearted warriors saving a corrupt Japan was about to become reality. A recording of their conversation survives. The content of the phone call reveals little except that it took Kita completely by surprise. He was stunned that his book, an apocalyptic work of the imagination, had become a stark reality. The rebels had gambled on the emperor supporting their cause, but the emperor called them traitors. On February 29th, as loyalist troops prepared to open fire, the rebels surrendered. The February 26th rebellion gave Japan's pragmatic military leaders an excuse to do just what the rebels had proposed: take over the country from civilian politicians in the name of order and the emperor. "17 leaders of the revolt were executed, but most of those who revolted were not punished, only those with dangerous ideas. In 1937, Kita Ikki was caught in the prison of his own imagination.
The army decided they better put him away while they investigated this incident, and pretty soon they executed him for treason as a communist. Now here's a guy who had, even by that time, 1937, been referred to as a right-wing radical. Now the army declares that he's a closet communist and shoots him.
The army feared Kita's plans to share Japan's wealth. But they would soon learn the propaganda value of many of Kita's other ideas. It turned out that Kita would be worth far more dead than alive. After Kita's death, the military glorified military expansion as an anti-Western crusade. Asia for the Asians was the battle cry. With cruel irony, the military used Kita's pan-Asian ideas not to liberate Asia, but to conquer it. The Japanese pushed further into China because they were afraid that Chiang might unify the country and form alliances with the West that might cut off Japan from China's resources. With cruel precision, they directed their most brutal attack on Chiang's capital, Nanjing. After taking the city, Japanese soldiers killed an estimated 200,000 men, women, and children. Japan's brutal attacks would backfire. They crippled Chiang, but they would serve as a bitter spur to far more radical Chinese nationalists.